Welcome back to another episode of the Pursuit Zone Adventure Travel Podcast. I am your host, Paul Schmid, and I interview explorers from around the globe to bring you their exciting stories. These are people that dream big, break out of their comfort zones, and take on ambitious pursuits. This is episode 167 with Chaz Powell. Chaz previously appeared in episode 141, where he talked about his trek on the Zambezi River through Africa. When we last spoke to him, he got stopped at the Mozambique border and was not able to continue. So in this episode, he tells us about the completion of that trek, and then we get into talking about his trek on the Gambia River. If you want to get in touch, you can send me an email at paul@thepursuitzone.com or leave me a voice message at speakpipe.com/thepursuitzone. And now, let me introduce my guest. In January 2019, Chaz Powell and Tim Roberts set off on a 1,120-kilometer trek of the Gambia River, from its source in the Fouta Djallon highlands of central Guinea to the coastal city of Banjul in the Gambia. It was a challenging 46 days through extreme temperatures and harsh landscapes, with constant hunger and dehydration as a companion, along with the wildest of animals. With unending hospitality and kindness from the locals, they were able to reach the Atlantic Ocean, becoming the first people to document a full source-to-sea trek of the Gambia River. For this expedition, Chaz partnered with the African Wildlife Foundation, one of the oldest and largest conservation organizations focusing on the protection of African wildlife and wildlands. You can learn more about Chaz and his adventures at thewildestjourney.com. Chaz Powell, welcome back to the show.
Thank you very much.
So Chaz, when we last left off speaking with you, you were on your Zambezi River trek and you had to stop at the Mozambique border because of civil unrest in the country, but you went back there. And so before we get into talking about the Gambia River trek, I'm wondering if you can help us recap that last bit of your Zambezi trek through Mozambique.
Okay, so yeah, I obviously came back to the UK after having to stop at the Mozambique border. Yeah, I think there was a bit of conflict in the areas at the time. There was a bit of a civil war happening in some of the regions along the Zambezi during that section. Not long after I decided to stop due to these threats of obviously danger, it appeared that the trouble had ceased, and I decided to go back to finish the Zambezi walk. Yeah, so it took me an extra 7 weeks to finish that walk, and during that time, I was obviously walking along areas which were a lot more dangerous than I'd been walking along before. I had to walk along the Cahora Bassa, which is a huge lake along the river. It was actually the second huge lake I had to walk on after Kariba. But the Cahora Bassa Lake, there was hardly any people along that part of the stretch. There was a huge national park on the northern bank of the lake, and there was a mountainous part along the southern part of the lake. So I had to and fro between each side. I couldn't walk on the northern part to start with, but due to needing a ranger and a guide, which I couldn't get permission for, so I started on the mountainous side of the lake until I could actually cross over. Obviously, due to the fact there wasn't many roads on that side, it was quite a heavy, thick scrub bush that I had to try and get through, and obviously walking up and down quite mountainous regions. It took me quite a lot longer than I was hoping for, but once I got past the sort of national park area, I crossed back over to the northern part of the lake, and it was a lot flatter and a lot easier to walk. I did have a few problems on that stretch of the walk. I was walking through villages, and it was a lot more hostile, and people were a lot more suspicious of why I was there, and obviously they recently had trouble in them areas, so there was a lot of suspicion, and I wasn't treated as nicely as I was in Zambia. But there's actually one occasion where I was sort of told I couldn't go through the village, and I was locked in a room for a few days, and that was obviously quite a terrifying thing, and it took me obviously a bit of time to explain what I was doing and whatnot, and get out of that situation. But To be honest, that section, it got quite frustrating, and because I wasn't being treated as nice, I sort of just got my head down and walked and tried to get it done towards the end, which wasn't, the whole aim behind this expedition was to take a wild journey and meet people. And towards the end of that walk, I sort of lost that feeling for it, and I decided I just wanted to get the walk done, and I got my head down and walked big distances. And towards the end of the walk, I was sort of walking through mangroves, and I was sort of just staying away from villages because I didn't want any more trouble. I got the walk done, and I reached the ocean after a good, 6-7 weeks of walking that final stretch. But yeah, it was incredible. It's always incredible to do these things, but that last stretch obviously took a lot out of me, and it was difficult. I'd say that.
I want to go back to one thing that you said about going to and fro, from one side of the lake to the other. How do you do that?
Well, I started when I crossed over from Zambia into Mozambique. I had to go over the Luangwa River, which was a tributary to the Zambezi, and that was the border crossing. And that actually brings me out on the northern bank of the river, of the lake, should I say. And then I decided, because that part of the lake, there was a huge national park on the north. The south. There was a huge national park on the south. I had to stay on the north of the first section. When I got past that national park, to get across to the south, I had to then take a boat. I had to go to a fishing village, and I had to sort of ask them, about getting across to the other side. It's quite a big lake, so to get across, it wasn't a simple sort of 10-minute journey. I had to get a few guys to paddle me across, which took a good hour to get across to the other side. But I only crossed that one time on the lake, so I walked probably just over half of it on the northern side, then across and walked the other half on the south side, because basically the northern part was taking me very long, and it was, because of the mountainous parts, and I couldn't always be by the lake due to the fact I was going up and down hills. And I decided, obviously, getting over to the south was going to make things a lot easier, and there was more villages, etc., which obviously turned out to be a worse part of it, due to the fact that on one of them villages on the south was where I was held captive for a few days. So
you're locked up. Do you have your things with you, or they take your things away from you? How did that situation play itself out?
It was a complicated thing. It was getting towards the end of the day, and towards the end of the day, it was obviously getting a bit dark, and I was trying to find somewhere to camp. But as it was getting to that stage of the day, I saw a man who was walking from a village, and I realized I was obviously approaching a village, and this man, they were obviously speaking Portuguese in Mozambique, but this guy could speak a little bit of English, and he was sort of saying to me, "Where are you going? What are you doing?" etc. And I said, I'm doing a walk. I'm trying to find somewhere to camp. And he was like, "Oh, come to the village. I'm sure it's fine," etc. And so I followed them to the village, and the process you go through in a village is to meet the head man, meet the chief, explain why you're there, etc. And then they normally welcome you, accommodate you, and look after you, etc. And find somewhere to pitch your tent or stay in a school, etc. But with this village, they were very suspicious, and they were like, "Why is this man here?" You could tell there was a lot of like confusion. I'd sat down, I was waiting for the chief, and the chief came. He couldn't speak English. This guy I'd met before could only speak a handful of words, so it was very difficult to fully explain why I was going through their village and why I wanted to stay. And in the end, I was sat down waiting for this decision for quite a few hours, and I think it was come to like 11 o'clock at night, and I'd been sat there since about 5 o'clock in the evening, and they'd managed to get a guy in from another village who could speak English. And basically what they said was, by this point as well, there was probably about 300 people that had gathered around, and it got quite hostile, and there was half the people were sort of arguing, "Why is this man here?" And then half the people were sort of, saying, you can tell they were trying to stick up for me, etc. And in the end, the decision was they didn't believe my story, and they thought I was too dangerous to be walking through their village. So I had my bag with me, and they pretty much grabbed me and started dragging me towards this hut in the village. I had my bag in my hand. So luckily I managed to keep hold of my possessions, and I obviously didn't know what was going on, but also at the same time I was so tired. I hadn't eaten all day, and I just wanted this confusing situation to be finished. So when I was in that room locked up, I just felt a bit like, I could rest at least and sort this out in the morning, which took me obviously a few mornings to sort out. In the end, the man I had originally met when I was entering the village was the man that let me out, and I managed to just get out there and get away. But it obviously put me off going through villages, and it obviously made me a bit more nervous about entering villages. So that last sort of month I was along the river, I just sort of steered clear as much as I could, which wasn't always easy, but luckily that was the only real time I had any kind of problems in that sense. But yeah.
Wow. Scary.
Yeah.
Okay. The Gambia River. What do we need to know about the Gambia River?
So the Gambia River is Western Africa. It's 1,120 kilometers long. It starts in the Fouta Djallon in Guinea, Conakry, and then it flows through Guinea. It flows through Senegal, and then it flows into the Gambia. So it's sort of the whole length of the Gambia, the country. And yeah, it's got some very wild sections along it. It starts in sort of mountainous regions in the Fouta Djallon, which is a very mountainous, sort of very remote area in Guinea, and then it goes into Senegal, and Senegal's got a huge national park in the middle of it, which we had to sort of try and get through, which I'm sure we'll talk about again more in a minute. But yeah, that was quite a difficult section. Then the country, the Gambia, it's quite a built-up area that it's a bit more populated, and it's sort of there's a road that wraps around the river pretty much. So that was probably the easier of the sections. But yeah, it took 47 days and a lot of effort. It was a difficult walk, very wild walk, and but yeah, enjoyable at the same time.
This time you had Tim Roberts along with you. Tell us about Tim, and how did he come out to be part of the team?
So Tim is a good friend of mine. We originally met several years ago when I did an expedition to walk and hitchhike to the northernmost point of Europe on a small budget. We had about £100 each to try and get to the northernmost point of Europe, which is another expedition in itself. But that was an expedition I put out to people. Does anyone want to join me on this expedition? And this happened to be Tim that contacted me, and we did that trip together. And that was obviously several years ago now, and we've stayed friends ever since then. Yeah, I mean, when I had the plan to walk the Gambia, the first person I sort of asked if they were interested in being involved was Tim, and I said, I want to do this walk. It's going to be going through these areas. It's never been done before. Do you fancy getting involved? He was like, straight away, just yes. And because he's a good photographer, he decided he wanted to come along and photograph the trip and help document the trip, and obviously an expedition partner as well. And yeah, it was good to have him along. But obviously, expeditions aren't always straightforward when you've got people with you. But it was nice to have Tim, and he made a good partner on the trip.
What is the northernmost point of Europe? Is that Nordkap?
Yeah, that's Nordkap. Yeah.
So how much time elapsed between the end of the Zambezi trek and the start of the Gambia?
So the Zambezi trip, it finished in the end of September in 2017, and the Gambia trek was January 2019. So this year, so it was a good sort of 15 months in between the two expeditions.
How much of that time did you have to spend preparing for the Gambia trek?
The Gambia trek, there's the planning and preparing side of it. I sort of had in my head that I knew what sort of kit I needed. I already sort of obviously done the Zambezi. That was a good training exercise to sort of prepare myself for a wild African walk. In preparation wise, obviously researched the areas and made sure I knew what I was getting into. Obviously not many people have no one's walked the river before, but there was people that had canoed it, and I just got in touch with these people and found out what sort of information they could offer, and researched the national parks, etc., and the languages. And there's only so much preparation you can do, I guess. And I think because the Gambia River was relatively easy visa-wise, Senegal, we didn't require a visa. It was just on arrival we could get a stamp, same as Gambia. all we had to do really was get a visa for Guinea before we left the UK, and that was the only real, the major problem I had on the Zambezi was trying to get visas and trying to, get permissions, etc. And with the Gambia River, the only permission we needed to get was to get through this national park. And even so, if we couldn't have got that, we'd have walked around. We had plan B, etc. But luckily, everything went as smooth as it could. And, preparation-wise, I think you can always overanalyze how much preparation you need as long as you're mentally, physically prepared and you've got your equipment and you've got your sort of idea of what you're getting yourself into, then you just sort of just go with it really, and the adventure unfolds as you're walking.
How did your kit change from the Zambezi to the Gambia?
Kit-wise, it's pretty similar. I'm sponsored by Craghoppers, which is an outdoor clothing company, and they supply me with clothing, and the clothing that I wear is Nosy Life, which is basically got built-in insect repellent, and it's sun protective, etc. And they're like long sleeve shirts, which are neutral colours that fit in with the environment and things like that. So they're perfect for Africa, perfect for expeditions, and I wear that sort of stuff. I wore the same sort of shoes I would wear on the Zambezi as well. I wore Merrell breathable walking shoes, which always have served me quite well. I use them. Water to go bottle as well, which is a water filtration system. I use that to be able to drink water straight from the river or straight from the boreholes or any kind of water source that we come across. That's just obviously non-salt water. We can drink straight from with these bottles, and it's it makes things so much easier to go more remote, etc. I carried a small tent, just carried, basic, small, minimal stuff really. Relied on a lot of villages to sort of get food from, only simple foods. Like we were basically eating dried pasta. We'd cook pasta, we'd obviously cook it, and then we'd use sardines. We got sardines from the shops, and vegetables were quite short supply, so we'd have like tomato pastes and things like that, which you could always get from the village shops. So we kept it quite simple and cooked on fires, on pots. And obviously carried stuff like first aid kits, carried a satellite phone, and just made sure we had enough. If anything went wrong, we could survive really. But on my adventures, I do try and think, I want to be comfortable when I'm walking. I don't want to be carrying a crazy amount of things, and I never really see the need to carry a crazy amount of things unless there's no possible chances of coming into contact with a village or a town. You can pretty much get away with, carrying, a week's worth of food and then being able to get something else within that week. So it was pretty. I'd say it was very similar to the Zambezi kit-wise.
Chaz, how do you get to the starting point? What part of Guinea do you fly into, and then is it a long drive to get to the source?
We actually flew into Conakry, which is Conakry. I probably said it wrong. It's actually the capital of Guinea. From there, we had to get a bush taxi. We were originally going to look at minibuses and things, but it was cheaper to get a taxi with this company that does trekking in the Fouta Djallon. So with them, we booked a taxi, which was about £80 or something. It wasn't a crazy amount of money, and we had to travel. I think it took us about 6 or 7 hours to get to Larbe, and from Larbe, that's the nearest sort of big town to where the source is. So we stayed the night in Larbe, and the following morning we arranged a local sort of bush taxi to take us to the source of the river, which was about an hour. It was only about an hour away. It's in a small village called Horodima. But that taxi that actually took us had 2 punches on the way. The road was obviously quite a bad state. It was quite a hilly road, and not many cars commute down there. So they'd obviously taken us, gone out their way to take us to this source of the river. But we had to walk due to the fact they had a couple of punches. We ended up having to walk to the source, which was only an extra couple of hours walking, but it was an experience in itself.
What kind of temperatures were you experiencing during your time there?
It was quite hot, actually. It was hard. There was no rain or anything like that. It was quite dry heat, and it went up to about 40 degrees Celsius on some days. And anyone else obviously walked in 40 degrees will know that it's pretty tough going, especially towards that starting section of the walk when it was very mountainous. We've gone up quite a few hills. It zapped the strength out of you, and myself, I guess I'm quite used to it, and I could get through it, and but there was definitely times we needed to rest, we needed to drink water, but I think Tim, it zapped the life out of Tim, the heat, and it was difficult to walk in them temperatures, but you just have to obviously make sure you keep hydrated, you escape the sun as much as you can every time you've got some good shade, and try and avoid the hottest part of the day, which, when you're walking. With myself, I always want to keep moving. I've got this mentality. I want to, quite challenge. Mindset's quite a challenging mindset, so I want to keep moving, pushing myself. And obviously, when I've got Tim with me, I had to remember that someone else with the expedition, so we have to take it a bit easier and take breaks from the heat.
Yeah. Do you guys try to settle into a routine and do the same things every day, or do you just try to, let's get up as early as possible, walk as long as we can, rest, and then continue walking late into the evening?
We tried a few techniques, to be honest. The original plan, similar to the Zambezi, was to sort of do that, start early, get quite a bit of distance covered, take good breaks in the day, and then walk late. But we sort of, the start of the expedition, we sort of probably started around 7 or 8 in the morning, which wasn't early, and then we'd pretty much walk all day. But that start of the expedition, we couldn't walk as far. We're obviously getting conditioned to the heat, the temperatures, the terrain, and it probably started by walking, maybe 20 kilometers a day. But we tried a few. I think towards the end of the expedition, we were getting into a bit of a pattern. We'd get up about 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. We'd get quite a lot of distance covered before it got hot. So by 9 o'clock in the morning, we'd have covered maybe 20 kilometers. Our sort of daily target was around 25, 30K. So we didn't have to walk insane after that. We could take it easy, maybe have a few hours rest, and maybe walk another 10 kilometers. And then we were pretty much done for the day. But that seemed to be the best technique. But obviously, if you're tired and just getting the motivation to get yourself up and get going, it can get quite a struggle after you've walked for days and days and days on end through difficult, temperatures. And there was time when I wasn't feeling very well, and Tim had bad feet. We were battling against a few issues that obviously affects time and affects how much you can walk each day, etc. But we managed to keep it consistent, and I think in the end it averaged out around 24, 25 kilometers a day, which was pretty good going.
Was most of Guinea pretty mountainous?
Well, mountains, I guess, wasn't like as high mountains. They were more like hilly, more of a hilly area, really. A lot of steep tracks, especially from the source. The source obviously starts and it flows down, but we were constantly walking up and down tracks, trying to refine the river. It was quite overgrown. Obviously, when it's quite small, the river, it's difficult to really have any kind of path around the river. So we found that first section, we were pretty much walking up and down hills, trying to track back to the river, trying to there was some pretty steep tracks, pretty steep hills that obviously zapped the life out of us quite a bit. And I think because it was the start of the expedition that we weren't obviously used to walking on that kind of terrain, and it felt like it was more difficult. But I think of all the 3 countries, I look back, I think Guinea was the one for me that was stand out and that I think I loved the most. The terrain, the views, the fact it was really wild. There was no electricity. There was hardly any roads. The people were just so welcoming, and it was just, for me, Guinea was, out of the 3 countries, was the most incredible.
What are you seeing out there for wildlife?
Wildlife, I go out to these places, and the main sort of aim behind a lot of my walks is to raise awareness for wildlife loss and wildlands loss and conservation issues, things. And I'm always shocked at the fact that in your mind you think you're going to see lots of animals, you think you're going to walk through these areas and there's lions, elephants, hippos, and the reality of it is these animals aren't very common anymore, and they're dying out at a very fast rate. And Guinea, we didn't see any real wildlife. Senegal, when we walked to the Niokolo Cobra National Park, we did see one lion, we saw a hippo, we saw some eland antelopes, but we didn't hardly see much at all. And it's always really eye-opening, because obviously many years ago these areas would have been really populated, and we saw quite a lot of baboons, saw some warthogs, but we didn't, we really, really didn't see much at all. And for me, that's more of a shock than if I'd have seen animals consistently, because it makes you realise that, these animals are obviously very scared of being around humans, as a lot of people live along the river. So that means the animals are getting pushed out into these wilder parts, which these wilder parts are obviously getting smaller and smaller and smaller the more human activity in the area, and obviously deforestation, the loss of the home for the wild animals. The river is actually getting polluted by all the gold mining along a lot of the parts. And, the sad reality is that we didn't really see much at all.
The next country's Senegal. What happens when you're on a river and you reach a border? Is there a border crossing there?
With the border crossings, we obviously had Guinea into Senegal, then Senegal into the Gambia. And with the border crossing, the first one, both border crossings, we had to pretty much go away from the river. And there's the nearest road going over the border from Guinea into Senegal, which was about 10 kilometers from the river. And we had to walk that. We had to just walk through the border pretty much. And there was obviously an immigration thing, more of a police patrol on the one side. They gave us a stamp. Then we walked over to Senegal, and Senegal was a bit more built up when we crossed that section. And we just went through the immigration there, and they pretty much stamped our passports. They were very chilled out about it. There wasn't really any confusion or any kind of worry about us going into the country. And I think because we were British, we had a British passport. They just sort of, they were happy to let us in. From there, it was just quite straightforward, really. I can't really say much about it in that sense, but we obviously had to get back to the river, which was the issue. We were trying to follow the river for the most part and stay as close as possible. But when you obviously go to these borders, you do get taken away from that area, and then sort of have to divert back to that region. But yeah, I would say it was pretty straightforward, and compared to the Zambezi, where I had so many issues with visas, that it felt like a breeze. It felt quite simple.
So one of the challenges in Senegal was you had to get through this national park, which I think is the Niokolo Koba National Park.
Yeah, that's it.
But in order to do that, you needed to get a permit. And so why was there an issue with trying to get a permit?
Well, to start with, we obviously looked into how can we get through this park. I thought to myself, there's a couple of roads going through this park. I thought surely they must, people must go through these areas, and surely there must be a way of actually getting through. But we had a couple of contacts. One was with the African Wildlife Foundation, and one was with a guy we knew who'd lived near. He put us up in Kedagu, which is on the edge of the sort of park, and he had basically the guy who looked after his property was a ranger, and that ranger was trying to get us permission to walk through the park, which would have required us to have armed guards, etc. And we'd have had to pay, obviously, for their escort through the park. In the end, the guy we stayed with, he said that we needed to go to the main office, which was a day's travel away by vehicle, and get a permission which could take several weeks to be issued, etc. And then in the end, that sort of said, we haven't got time. We had a time scale to do this expedition. We didn't really have time to go around doing that. And I'd sort of half given up on the fact of getting a visa. And we were thinking about walking around, which would have added an extra couple of days on, but it would have made obviously more sense than trying to go through all this rigmarole of trying to organise a permit, which might take weeks to sort out. But in the end, we had a contact with African Wildlife Foundation, and he was really, really good. He was involved with the rangers, etc. He was quite high up, and he basically rang them, told them what we wanted, and they said yes straight away. And this was like when we were, half thinking of giving up on the idea, and then we met this guy, and he said, I'll sort it for you. And we were like, are you sure? And he was like, yeah, I'll sort it for you. And then within 24 hours, we had a permit, which meant we could walk through the park. We had to walk along the river to the edge of the park, and then we had to meet our guides, and they, from there, it was pretty straightforward, to be honest. We were 4 days in the national park with 2 rangers. We paid obviously for their escort, and we fed them. We made sure they had food, and we stayed at the ranger stations within the park. They looked after us really well, and looking back on it, that was another incredible part of the expedition. Very nerve-wracking. Obviously, we're walking through areas where there's lions, and any possible moment a lion could be there, and we'd have had to obviously dealt with that, which would have been quite difficult. But yeah, it was a difficult process, but very rewarding in the end, and really happy that we managed to get the permission. And the main sort of thing that made me happy is obviously we could stay near the river and complete the journey from source to sea without any kind of diversions, any kind of major diversions, which was perfect.
So you spent 4 days with these guides. Did you learn anything from them?
They didn't speak a word of English, so verbally didn't really learn a hell of a lot from them. But I learned, how to walk in these areas, and how to sort of act if there's an animal around. When we saw a lion, we had to stop, and we had to make sure this animal was moving away. We couldn't scare it. We couldn't go near it. It was quite far in the distance. And these guys can see things, and I was looking around in the thick bush, and these animals camouflage so well that how they could see these animals was unbelievable. The eyesight and the just knowing that these animals are there, the smells, the tracks, the incredible people that work in these areas. And I learned, I guess, that the job they do is so, so incredible, for very little money. The good people, but also, the knowledge they have is incredible. I guess as far as being able to walk through areas on my own like that, I just have to make sure I knew, to walk in the same way they taught me to walk, single file, and just give animals distance and time, etc. But I think for the most part, any national park you go through, you need a ranger, you need an escort, and I learned that you can obviously see why that's the case.
Next country is the Gambia. What changes from Senegal into the Gambia?
Senegal was a lot more wild, I think, probably because it was a huge national park. And as soon as we came out of the national park, it was only a couple of days from there to the Gambia border. And the Gambia itself, we had to sort of walk away from the river once again and come back. We had to do like a bit of a zigzag because the road sort of cut down and then cut back up again to get into Senegal, into the Gambia, sorry. But once we got into the Gambia, the river and the road are very, very close together. So we found it a lot more easy to walk near the river, be able to get to the river at all times. There was a lot more villages, a lot more towns. It started to get, the closer we got to the ocean, basically, the more built up it became, and more touristy and things. A lot of people go to these areas and they don't really ever go to the really wild sections where people aren't used to tourists. And for me, that was the most incredible part. And the closer we got to the ocean, it was more apparent that they were used to tourists. They'd have their hands out asking us for money, etc. And it didn't feel as humbling and genuine as the rest of the parts we've been through. But I guess, any kind of place thrives on tourism and relies on tourism to increase, these things like the towns, the roads, etc. It was different, but I think once we went into the Gambia, I think that the wildness sort of slowly went away. And for me, the wildness is what my expeditions are all about. And I remember, obviously, Guinea felt so wild and incredible and humble. And, we were looked after so well. And the people were just so genuinely great. And, and then towards the end of the expedition, it was, the people were always really nice. People were incredible. But it felt always a bit more like it was done more out of tourism than out of genuine sort of heartfelt hospitality. And there was always some kind of money that had to be involved with it, if you know what I mean. And there was never any kind of just sort of letting us in and helping us out. But that's the way it is, unfortunately,
Well, we started the conversation by talking about your trip through Mozambique on the Zambezi River trek, your previous adventure, and how you just wanted to put your head down and just get through these villages because you were having bad experiences with the locals in certain cases. But in the Gambia River adventure, I mean, how was your interactions with the villages, and what did you learn from the people going through this walk?
We didn't have any kind of bad feeling with anybody, really. I think what was the most frustrating, and once again, it was towards the end, was we were getting called Tubab, which is basically white man, and they were saying, give me this, and that can get quite frustrating, because constantly someone asking you to give you something all the time. And, fair enough, these people don't have much, and they probably do need things, but we were obviously on a remote expedition. We only had what we had in our bags, and constantly getting that can be quite draining and quite frustrating, because you can only say sort of no to people. And but yeah, there wasn't any kind of bad feeling. I'd constantly laugh and just say, sorry mate, and I haven't got anything, etc. But we didn't have any kind of negative. A couple of times the police would stop us and sort of ask us what we were doing, but then they, once we explained and we had a conversation with them, they'd always be really genuinely nice people. And yeah, I think compared to Mozambique, which is understandable in Mozambique, if they've been through troubled times, you can't really blame them for being suspicious and angry. And if you're used to that way of life, then that's going to obviously affect the way you might treat other people. But, the Gambia, they've also been through quite troubled times. And I always go into these places with a very open mind that, I'm a visitor to their country, and I shouldn't always expect people to open their arms and welcome me every time. It's going to be occasions where I'm going to get, people wondering what I'm doing and maybe giving me a bit of hostility when I reach their villages or something like that. And I'm very aware of it, but I can't really say a bad word about any of the countries really, except for the fact that you could tell it was a bit more touristy, and they obviously were used to seeing people more and getting things, etc. But there's no real. I didn't have that same mindset of I want to get it finished. It obviously wasn't as long an expedition. It was 47 days, this one, and the Zambezi was 137 days. And Zambezi had taken me, planning stage to finish stage. It took me several years, and it drained the life out of me a little bit. It was a very difficult walk, but the Gambia trip, it was a 7-week walk, and I enjoyed every moment of it. I was quite relaxed, and my tolerance level had probably built up quite a lot from previous expeditions. And we finished the Gambia River on the coast at the Atlantic Ocean, and it was a very holiday type vibe. There was beach bars, beach hotels, restaurants, and it's quite a really nice place to finish. Obviously, the Zambezi. The opposite, I finished on a beach, and there was mangroves. It wasn't this palm laden beach I was hoping for, and I had to get back up the river for a few days to then be able to get out. But where we finished in the Gambia, that was where the airport was. It was within a half an hour's drive from the end to the airport. We had basically about a week at the end to relax and celebrate, really, that we'd finished the expedition. But it was completely different. I had no real problems in that sense.
Well, congratulations on the accomplishment.
Thank you very much.
So on the Zambezi, you're by yourself, but on this one, you're with Tim. Did it make it better, or do you prefer to be solo on these?
Yeah, I get what you mean. It's a lot of the, why I do these expeditions is to escape. And sometimes escape, but that's probably not a good word. But to do, doing solo expeditions is always great. You go at your own pace. You do what you want. You eat when you want. You sleep when you want. You meet people you want to meet. You act in a certain way. When other people are with you, sometimes you're not always like that. You're obviously spending time with that person. You're not always going to act the way you would with people. We've always got to compromise. And with me and Tim, we're very good friends, but we walk at different paces. We have different mindsets, and it's quite a common thing on an expedition that when you're walking with people, there can be problems. But I think me and Tim are quite laid back people. We're both understanding, and every time we realised that we were getting on each other's nerves, we probably just sort of sit down, relax, and they say we'll laugh about it. And I walked quite quick. I do walk quite quick. I know that, and I can walk quite far as well in a day. And I think Tim suffered more with the heat and with his feet. So I was always aware that I needed to be just a bit calmer and a bit, take my time a little bit more and compromise a bit more. And, I think there's several expeditions you can do that are better on your own. And then some things that are good with partnerships. But I think, it was a bit of both. Sometimes I was frustrated and I just wanted to get moving. And sometimes I wanted to eat and then Tim wasn't hungry. And there's always sort of little compromises that can get to you a little bit. And but solo expeditions I do love, but I'm an expedition leader as well, so I'm quite used to taking groups away and understanding that some people have certain things they need to do, etc., and some people are more relaxed, and it's just about accepting of someone else. But it was good and bad. Good and bad, I'd say, is the end to that one. But I do like walking solo, but then also I do like walking with other people. But I guess there's always a limit where you need your own space, etc.
What did you find to be the most challenging moments of the trek?
Probably the heat, to be honest. The heat was really, the Zambezi was similar, but the heat in the Gambia, it took me so long to get used to, and it would zap the life out of you. It was so hot, 40 degrees some days, and walking in that, I felt quite ill at one point. I don't know if it was the fact of the heat, but it was zapping the life out of me. I found it really difficult to sort of keep my head strong and get up and walk, and without feeling weak. There was also hunger problems because we couldn't always get food, and we didn't eat. When you're walking, you're burning so many thousand calories a day, and we needed to replace them ideally, but you're having probably a quarter or a third of what you need to run on energy wise, and eventually it does get tiring. And I quite like my food and things as well, so going without to that extent, maybe eating once a day was quite tough. I guess part of an expedition thing is to be aware that you might not always be able to get food, but we were always quite hungry. We were limited with vegetables and even fruit. Sometimes we were eating what we could get, but there was definitely several times we didn't eat much at all, and we became quite hungry. That was quite difficult. But also language barrier was a little bit of an issue. There wasn't much English speaking for the first sort of month or so. Guinea and Senegal, quite obviously French speaking countries, and we had limited French to both of us. And there were several little things that were difficult, but overall, it was stuff you could deal with. And, you always knew that, like the hunger, you always knew within a day or two you're going to reach a village, you get some more food, you're going to restock. You just have to keep mentally. I think with these expeditions, it's always more mentally than physically. You have to just mentally know that it's not going to be forever. You're going to get past this stage. It's going to be okay, et cetera, and push through these little challenges. And I think part of the reason why I do these expeditions is because I like these mental challenges, and I'll accept them, if you know what I mean.
What did you find to be the most memorable moment?
It's a difficult question because I think on the trip there's so many little moments that are really, I guess I can say memorable, from being treated well, from people taking you in, and just genuinely being so good. These people have been so nice, just sitting by the river and just looking out and it really feeling good that you're in this beautiful place. And it's a wild place, and sometimes even just walking. I love walking. I love being on an adventure, and every little moment. Even like the kids running up, giving you high fives and things like this. They're all moments that just make you feel great. It always make you feel fantastic when you can get drained. You reach a village, people will come in. They'll be really interested in what you're doing. They'll be really genuinely good people and nice, and it'll just bring you straight up again. You'll be like, wow, this is incredible. So I guess memorable moments, even, you're going to think of the finish point, everything on the trip. There's massive highs and, there's big lows, like say the challenging moments, but overall it's the whole expedition is the most memorable. Is that a bit cheesy? Am I allowed to say that?
No, it is a tough question. It's 47 days out there, so a lot of things.
Yeah, I can't think there's a standout sort of moment, but just combination of many, I'd say.
Were you doing any fundraising? Do you want to say anything about the African Wildlife Foundation and why you were partnered with them? And maybe there's a donation page that you want to direct people to? I'm not sure.
With the African Wildlife Foundation, I'm an ambassador for Water2Go, which is a water filtration company, and they recently partnered with the African Wildlife Foundation, and they make the African Wildlife Foundation bottles, and every bottle that's purchased, £10 then goes to the charity, to the African Wildlife Foundation. Most of my adventures are in Africa, so I'm walking Africa's wildest rivers in aid of wildlife conservation, and for me it was a bit of a no-brainer that I'd love to sort of help out and partner with the African Wildlife Foundation myself. They're obviously battling the same cause as me. They're trying to raise awareness for the loss of wildlife, the wildlands, and doing as much as they can, really. And really sort of, we've got some huge sort of bonuses to being involved. They can help me out with permissions. They can, like they did, they helped me out get permission for this part, put me in touch with people, and the partnership was really good. And I feel that, my future expeditions is going to get better and better. And what I want to do is raise as much money as I can. Each expedition, I want to raise as much funds and awareness for wildlife conservation. And my donation page, which I'm always trying to get people to donate, tell them why I'm doing the expeditions, tell them why I'm raising awareness for wildlife loss. It's insane what I've seen. I've walked past elephants. I've heard stories of people poaching. I've seen people shooting. I've stayed at some places, and the reality of it is really horrifying. And I'm very passionate about wildlife. I love wildlife and I love wild places. So raising awareness for this is to me, it's just something I'm really, really passionate about getting involved with. And if anyone does want to donate, then you can go on my link, my donation page, which is www.justgiving.com/thewildestjourney. And on there, you'll find my page.
I can add that link to the show notes as well. So Chaz, what's on the horizon for you?
So with my future, I'm teaching survival and I'm leading expeditions for several companies, but my own personal journey is obviously something I want to keep pursuing. And I've got a couple of big expeditions I want to do next year. One of them, well, they're both sort of African rivers once again, but I'm reluctant to obviously say what they are at the moment until I've finalised and got together all the information and details. But what I'm planning on doing for the next couple of expeditions is having people join me on them. There'll probably be some kind of joining fee attached. It's obviously the way I'm going to fund my expeditions, but I'll be leading the expedition, planning the expedition, sorting out in-country projects people can get involved with, and obviously world's first as well, expeditions that haven't been done, wild adventures and things like that. So I want to do a couple of big expeditions, but have them as team events. So I'll have maybe 4 or 5 in a team, and we'll tackle a wild journey together. But this is still something I'm working on, and I want to, on my website, thewildestjourney.com, I'm still trying to piece together the infrastructure of the trip and how it's going to work, and just make sure I get it all perfectly planned before I start advertising it out to others. But yeah, there's definitely a few trips on the horizon, and I think it's, for the next several years, I think I'll continue to do these things. I can't ever see it stopping, to be honest, but I'm sure one day I'll get tired and need to slow down a bit and take it easy. But I think when you get this sort of travel addiction, that you need to keep feeding it, and these wildest journeys will definitely be a continuous thing for several years, I'd think.
Very cool. Sounds exciting. What's the best way for people to get in touch with you if they want to?
For me, thewildestjourney.com is my website. The main pages I use are Instagram and Facebook. If anyone types in The Wildest Journey on either of those, Instagram or Facebook, then you'll be able to see all my pictures, my stories, and contact me if there's anything you need to know, etc. But yeah, that's pretty much where I do everything. And if anyone's obviously interested in getting involved in any kind of future trips, then the best place to contact me is The Wildest Journey. Putting The Wildest Journey in Google, I'm sure you'll find the website and the Instagram, Facebook, etc. And I've got Twitter and things, but I guess Instagram, Facebook, the main two really.
Chaz Powell, thank you so much for coming on the show again. I really appreciate it. And congratulations once more on your accomplishments, and good luck with all these projects you have in the future.
Thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me on the show.
Thank you so much for listening. If you want to support the show, here are a few ways. Subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, on YouTube, or wherever you listen to the podcast. Follow the show on Facebook or Twitter. The handle is @ThePursuitZone. And of course, please leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or iTunes or Spotify. This episode was recorded on April 25th, 2019. For the show notes and more great adventure travel podcasts, visit thepursuitzone.com.